Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to a new episode of Business Insider. Tonight, we'll be talking about how to maximize the economic value of Egypt's natural resources. That is our topic. But first, and as usual, we'll take a look at the top economic headlines making the news for this past week. Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli chaired a cabinet meeting on Tuesday to follow up on efforts exerted by the Sovereign Fund of Egypt, the TSFE, to attract foreign and local investments. Madbouli began the meeting by asserting the importance of keeping the efforts underway to create an investment-friendly environment in all sectors and rolling out more incentives to lure a larger number of investors into the Egyptian market and encourage current investors to expand their businesses in Egypt. He also highlighted the fund's vital role as Egypt's investment arm that serves the state's development plans and policies. In addition to the TSFE's efforts to promote available investment opportunities, the meeting also tackled coordination with the local and international bodies concerned to increase the private sector's engagement in many projects targeted by the fund, such as desalination, renewable energy, and green hydrogen. During the meeting, the Premier reiterated the need to deepen public-private partnerships as effective and innovative tools for creating new markets and stimulating private investments in various sectors. And Minister of International Cooperation, Dr. Rania El-Mashat, had bilateral talks with the host of officials representing governments and international financial institutions on the sidelines of her participation in the International Monetary Fund's, IMF's and World Bank Group's annual spring meetings 2023 in Washington, D.C. During a meeting with International Finance Corporation IFC Regional Vice President for Africa, Sergio Pimenta, Mashat discussed means of boosting the continuing efforts of both sides to promote the participation of the private sector in the development process, alongside maintaining programs being implemented in cooperation with the private sector to support economic growth. Al-Mashat asserted the importance of upholding joint action with the IFC with a view to opening new vistas for the participation of the private sector in various domains, expanding funding mechanisms as well as investments directed to Egyptian firms. The meetings tackled progress achieved in the Green Buildings Initiative, which is said to be carried out by the IFC in collaboration with the private sector. And Minister of Petroleum, Dr. Tarek El-Mullah, on Wednesday said that concessions of oil companies operating in Sinai still have proven petroleum reserves that require continued cooperation and coordination among these firms. The minister, during the regular meeting of the Committee on Upgrading and Upping the Current Production Rate of Crude Oil, has underscored the significance of opting for innovative solutions, utilizing potentials and resources, alongside boosting the ongoing operations in oil areas, including the Sinai Peninsula. The current hikes in global oil prices constitute a powerful incentive for oil companies to intensify their exploration activities and drill more wells in order to boost the production. Al-Mullah said the minister was briefed on the reserves of the oil firms operating in Sinai oil areas, as well as ways of developing these reserves and overcoming the challenges facing them. Time now for a short break, dear viewers, and when we come back, we will be introducing you to our distinguished guests who will be with us here in the studio, as we will be talking about how best to maximize the economic value of Egypt's natural resources. We'll also be watching a report on our topic for tonight's episode. Please stay with us. Welcome back, dear viewers. Thank you for staying with us. And with us now here in the studio is Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr, Professor of Plant Genetics and Biodiversity at Helwan University. A very good evening to you, Dr. Badr. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me in your show.
Thank you, Dr. Badr. Allow us, please, and allow us, the viewers, first to watch a report on our topic for tonight, how best to maximize the economic value of Egypt's natural resources.
Egypt has many natural resources that can put it in the ranks of global health destinations, according to Adel El-Gindi, the Director General of the General Department of Strategy at the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. His remarks came during his speech in a medical tourism conference that was held under the auspices of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. During the conference, El-Gindi delivered a speech pointed out that Egypt has many natural resources that can put it in the ranks of global health destinations, pointing out that the capabilities and competitive elements of the Egyptian health destination are not limited to this momentum of resources only. He added that the state has prepared investment plans to benefit economically from this tourist product, taking into account the highest levels of sustainability and responsible development in terms of environmentally friendly capacity and climate compatible with the nature of the region, in addition to establishing a land and air transportation network that facilitated access to locations with these resources while enabling local communities to continue traditional practices to provide an enriching healing experience. He stressed that Egypt's success in becoming a distinguished regional center in the treatment of many diseases and the superiority of its human resources in eliminating intractable viruses, as well as its ability to overcome the repercussions of the coronavirus pandemic, made it a destination filled with high profit investment opportunities in the field of health tourism. In addition to the agricultural capacity of the Nile Valley and Delta, Egypt's natural resources include petroleum, natural gas, phosphates, and iron ore. Crude oil is found primarily in the Gulf of Suez and in the Western Desert. Natural gas is found mainly in the Nile Delta of the Mediterranean seashore and in the Western Desert. Egypt's excess of natural gas will more than meet its domestic demand for many years to come. The Ministry of Petroleum has determined that expanding the Egyptian petrochemical industry and increasing exports of natural gas as its most significant strategic objectives.
Right, thank you very much, Rasha Abdel Hamid and Abir Hussein, for this report. Back here with our dear guest in the studio, Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr. Dr. Badr, certainly Egypt has a lot of natural resources. We heard in the report minerals, oil, gas, renewable energy, water resources, and then your specialty, I guess, the plants, the genetics, the medicinal, the microorganisms, the wildlife, the aquatic.
Egypt,
yeah. So, and certainly the natural resources play a big role in helping Egypt or any country achieve its sustainable development goals.
Yes.
So can we begin from this point?
Yes, I would start with the wildlife natural resources of Egypt, which is mainly based on plants and animals, in addition to microorganisms, which is normally ignored in the public talk about natural resources, although microorganisms contain very important substances for medical uses and even for bioenergy as well, in addition to aquatic life on the Mediterranean and on the Red Sea. In addition to this wildlife, of course, we have geological natural resources like minerals, like oil and gas. We'll go again to also water resources, of course, is important and essential for the wildlife.
So how do all of these resources play a role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, the plants, of course, Egypt has about 2,100 wild plants, and we have many endemic plants. Endemic meaning present only in Egypt, so particularly in South Sinai. And about more than 25% or 30% are medicinal plants. And medicinal plants of Egypt are very famous, but unfortunately, we harvest the plants and export the leaves of the plants. We need to maximize the use. We should not actually export plants as plants or plant leaves, but we can extract the medicinal substances in these plants and use them for drug manufacturing.
And this is where the added value would come from.
Of course. Also, with respect to medicinal plants, we do not only rely on wild medicinal plants. We also cultivate medicinal plants in many governorates in Egypt. Probably the most cultivating areas are Fayoum, Bani Suif, and Almenia. And they export a lot of medicinal plants as well. But even they still they export medicinal plants as medicinal plants or as extract of the leaves, but not as, it's not manufactured. We need to link the natural resource with the industry. So the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, can take a step forward in manufacturing medicinal drugs from our medicinal plants. However, I must say that we have an advanced medicinal industry, pharmaceutical industry, but we need more, not only for domestic use. We can also export drugs. Of course, Egypt exports drugs, which is one of the successful industries in Egypt. Also, we still need more based on our natural resource of medicinal plants.
You think we can create also a number of new industries if we do this?
Based on natural resources, we have, of course, first, in addition to medicinal plants for drug industry, medicinal plants is actually important for the life, for the ecotourism. For example, in Sinai we have a lot of medicinal plants. Folk medicine is important part. We import a lot for folk medicine plants from other countries, but we can develop our wild plants and use it as in folk medicine. If the substance is not sufficient for drug industry, we can use it in folk medicine, which is very common in Egypt and many other countries as well.
Yes.
So if we actually, medicinal plants has economic can improve the economy and can protect the environment, and they can also contribute to sustainable development, and they can save water resources.
So let's talk.
These are four major objectives of or services of wild.
Sure. So let's take them one by one. Economic improvement.
Yeah. Economic improvement, we can fill the gap between domestic needs of medicinal plants and the pharmaceutical industries, and that's one. Another is exports. We can export medicinal drugs made of medicinal plants. We can create small industries. You know, we are now trying to establish new small industries, and this is a field where small industries can be sustainable, successful, and also can provide cash income for settlers in new parts of Egypt if they can cultivate wild plants, then wild medicinal plants. That would be part of newly reclaimed land and desert areas as sources of medicinal plants.
What about environment protection?
Environmental protection,
Egypt, is playing a leading role, by the way, in fighting global warming and climate change.
You know, they do something important. They do dune stabilization. Dunes, you know, where plants grow. Some areas where these plants grow are called dunes. And sandy dunes are close to the Mediterranean, for example. And these are movable. So if these plants are cultivated, they will actually stabilize the dunes. So the soil will not be moved away by wind and so on. So this is very important, dune stabilization. Wildlife habitat enrichment. They will enrich the area, the habitat where they live, and they also contribute to biodiversity conservation. These are the full three objectives of medicinal plants in environmental protection.
And of course, because any country in the world would want to achieve its own sustainable development goals, with priority to certain goals over others. So how could these natural resources help Egypt in achieving its sustainable development
With
goals?
respect to medicinal plants, if we cultivate medicinal plants, we will stop introducing weeds, because medicinal plants are competitive to weeds and pests. They are not subjective to weeds and pests like cultivated plants. They need so we will use less insecticides and other minerals, minimal ecological consequences of agro-ecosystems, and the last one is the minimal degradation and salinization of soil and the erosion of soil. So these are the environmental impact of medicinal plants, the contribution.
And they also help us in conserving water?
And they can conserve water, because they are used to growing in the desert, and their features, their morphological. You know, the morphology is the external shape of the living organism. So from their morphological characteristics and their anatomical characteristics are used to minimize the use of water. They can live with a minimum. They can keep water, and they can control losing water. So they can actually grow in dry soil.
So these not only help us in conserving water, but also help us in achieving the goal of using water more efficiently. And that's another big natural resource, of course, water, the biggest
water,
of all.
Water is very big natural resource of Egypt. And as we know, natural resources of water to Egypt is limited, because we don't have sufficient rainfall. But if we can use plants that are capable of living at low water consumption, that would be very useful in conserving the water for other agricultural crops. Of course, the reliance of Egypt on the River Nile is declining, because the amount of water available from the river line is constant, while but great success has been made in the recent years in alternative sources of water, like rain-fed harvesting, like reuse of treated water from domestic and from agricultural sources.
The desalination.
Desalination is another important, although it's expensive, but in the future we have to use salinization as source of water as well.
Dr. Badr, and you're a professor of plant genetics, so genetic resources are definitely part also of our natural resources. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, genetic resources are the material for developing the new cultivars, new types of crops. And with the climate change and with the limited resources of water in Egypt, development of climate change tolerant crops is major objectives. And you can use these by using plants that are already tolerant to drought or salinity. Barley is relatively more drought tolerance than wheat, and we can take the genes from the wild plants that are adapted to growing in harsh conditions like drought and salinity, and transfer the gene to the new crops. So we will use the current crops for introducing a more productive cultivars or varieties of plants that can use less water than the current crops. This is actually a major international concern.
Is it happening?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes,
is it just
happening.
it's not just academic talk.
No,
I mean,
it's not academic talk. Actually,
acting on the ground.
So acting on the ground, and the Agricultural Research Center has started this from the 70s of the last century. And they even developed some cultivars that were named Sahrawi, meaning Sahrawi desert, that's more adapted to the desert. They started with barley because it's easy to start with a crop that's relatively tolerant, so they can increase the tolerance. But even with wheat, we have successful attempts in the last few years. We should actually encourage our colleagues working in the Agricultural Research Center and other centers attempting to develop new crops using new approaches. And another approach actually is to use tissue culture approaches, so to propagate plants very fast through approaches with the so-called biotechnology. So you can accelerate the growth of plants using tissue culture.
The pace or the speed of doing this on the ground, are you satisfied with it, or do you think we should move faster?
Of course, we should not move faster, but if we are too fast, the results would not be as good as if something is made under control. And even with respect again to the medicinal plants, we harvest medicinal plants for export or for extracting. We can keep these plants in the desert, keeping the environmental desert and keeping their biodiversity, and use biotechnology to produce the secondary metabolites, the medicinal substances in the tissue culture, in the lab. So we conserve medicinal plants in this way using biotechnological approaches. Biotechnological approaches is actually is applied also in agricultural crops, in gene transfer methods. Gene transfer is a new method, but when we do gene transfer, we need to check the heritability of the characters. It has to be transferred to generations, not only to get one generation and every time we do the same experiments again. So genetics is very important in this respect. So the criteria acquired by the crop should be inherited to next generation.
And Dr. Badr, microorganisms are also part of the natural resources,
yes, microorganisms is very important, and of course our interest in microorganisms is actually increased. We used to have botany departments in the Faculty of Sciences. Now the department has changed into department of botany and microbiology, and there is microbiology in the agricultural colleges, even in the pharmacy and medicine in the Faculty of Medicine. With regard to the natural resources, it's mainly in the Faculty of Science and the research centers, because we know penicillin was discovered almost 90 years ago, or more than 90 years ago, and was very important source of antibiotics. Later, most of our antibiotics come from microorganisms. Microorganisms now can use some products that can combat pollution, oil pollution, for example. We can make the bacteria develop plants that can dissolve oils if the sea is polluted.
A natural resource combating the pollution of another natural resource.
Yeah. That's good. Pollution can also be caused by industry, like oil, like
cement,
waste from factories, even domestic waste. So waste can be source of pollution. The emissions can be source of pollution, and these substances can degrade the substances by breaking these substances and transferring into eco-friendly substances, substances that's not harmful to the environment or to the human health health or to the plants and animals.
Sure, and that's achieving sustainable development goals.
Yes. So our wealth of microorganisms are important. We should develop more, and we should actually keep these resources. Of course, we have centers. We have centers at the Natural Science Center at the College of Science at Asyut University. They have a big center named after Professor Mubashir, who established the center, who was actually the dean of the Faculty of Science at Asyut when I was a student some 50 years ago. And in the Agricultural College of Ain Shams, they have also a collection of microorganisms. But we always look forward to more success and more efforts to develop our natural resources, not only in plants and animals, but also in microorganisms.
Sure, and a natural resource that we have to preserve and keep preserving is the aquatic wildlife, which in itself is a big resource. Can you talk to us about that? And how can we add value from it?
We can add value from, take for example, the coral reefs. Coral reefs is very important because they capture, and the other plants, of course, in the sea, they can capture the carbon dioxide and transfer this carbon dioxide into carbohydrates in their bodies. So they minimize the climate change. We know climate change is caused by emissions of carbon dioxide, mainly carbon dioxide, and by minimizing the carbon dioxide emission and by helping the aquatic plants to absorb carbon dioxide, then we save the environment from climate change. In addition, these are sources of the fish that lives in the sea, are sources of food. Like we have plants and animals on land, we have fishes and other marine sources. That's very important, not only for environmental protection, but as a food, for human food as well.
I'm glad, Dr. Badr, that you talked to us about some of the most underrated, I guess, natural resources like the medicinal plants or the genetic or microorganisms. But now let's talk about some of, I'm not going to say the overrated, but the ones that are always being talked about, the minerals, the oil and the gas. If we start with the minerals like the phosphate maybe or the white sand, how best can we maximize the economic value?
I think phosphate and the white sand are important sources. Phosphate, of course, is used in manufacturing many compounds, mostly the fertilizers, because phosphate is required for plants to grow. White sand, I think we
using
need also
glass.
Glass is made of sand, and there is some sort of quartz. You know, the quartz is very important for young microships. We have some sands. We have gold mines in the eastern desert of Egypt. We are rich in mining. I think also we still need more mining from different, not only phosphorus and other minerals as well. And these can be used for manufacturing, not only exporting phosphate or exporting aluminium. But we can do more products, and we sell these products by adding more value to our exports of the natural resource. Not only the biological resources like we talked about medicine plants, but also manufacturing aluminium products, phosphate products, and even more market products, not raw materials sold to other more developed countries to resell it to us at expensive prices. So these are the areas where we need to add more to maximize the values, the economic values of our resources. Minerals are another field that needs more attention.
And Egypt historically rich in clay, so I guess the clay deposits are also
clay deposits
important.
are important for agriculture. It enriches agricultural products as well. And sand is very important, phosphate is very important. Many other minerals, of course, if we can go to the geologist, probably can talk more about about the mineral resources because this is their field of interest. But I assume there are some attempts have been made, but I will always call for more link between industry and the basic science. So if the geologists discover new minerals or do some establishing old mines, these mines should be linked to the industry and manufactured in a market products that is more profitable to our economy as well.
I want to close out by talking about renewable energy. But before we do that, let's talk about oil and gas. And we heard in the report prepared by our
that
colleagues.
Was very interesting report, and it said of
Egypt
course,
is rich in gas.
Egypt is rich in gas. We have successful discoveries in the last few years, but oil is declining. So we need probably...
We heard the petroleum minister saying that we have reserves in Sinai, proven reserves.
I'm not sure if we are self-sufficient in oil. I suppose we import some, but we have potential of more production of oil. We have potential of more productive in gas. We've been successful.
We have an advanced petrochemical
industry. We have petrochemical industry, successful petrochemical industry, but we still need more. Or this is a successful sector which can be actually done in other sectors.
It's a model to be
a model
followed.
for other sectors as well. And the gas, I think our agreement with other countries make future prospects for more gas discoveries. And of course, we talked before about the use of gas more than the oil, because oil is polluting more than the gas, and probably in the future the plan is to increase our solar energy. We need to increase our wind energy,
so we're getting to
water energy, so we minimize the polluting sources of energy to more eco-friendly sources like wind and solar energy and water energy.
Well, certainly Egypt is working on increasing the supply of electricity generated from renewable sources. So let's close out.
I think if we need some estimates, we are using now 80% of thermal power plants and renewable by 20%. In about 35, I think we will be 55% for thermal power and 42% renewable energy, which is a very ambitious plan.
12 years from now.
12 years from now, it would be achieved, inshallah.
So renewable energy, what's the outlook in general for it in Egypt, and how best to maximize its
I think thermal
awaited value?
Solar energy is the favorite, of course. We have a lot of sun. Water energy is not promising because we have the high dam and we don't have many other dams as well. Probably wind. We have
solar and wind.
Solar and wind, I think. Solar and wind. Some people talk about biofuels, which is from algae. Algae is aquatic plants. But I think it's not as successful as the solar energy.
And where does green hydrogen fill in? I mean, because we heard
green hydrogen is a very important source.
Relatively new term. Relatively, so.
You know, hydrogen is very common. Water is composed of oxygen and hydrogen. Hydrogen can have a lot of energy. If hydrogen is released, we can take hydrogen from water. That's why hydrogen is built near the sea, because to use the water for hydrogen. There's another way to get hydrogen, not from water, from other sources, but these are still experimental, and we are taking a progressive projects in this field. This
environment friendly, definitely.
It's environmental friendly. It will, on the longer term, I think hydrogen will be a major source of energy as well.
All right. On that note, dear viewers, unfortunately we've come to the end of this episode, And we thank on behalf of you, our dear guest here in the studio, Dr. Abdel Badr, the Professor of Plant Genetics and Biodiversity, Helwan University. Always a great pleasure to have you.
It's always a great
Dr.
pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, very much. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching us.